My name is Mary Kate Connolly. I'm a writer and lecturer, and I'm currently in my first year of doctoral study here in the dance department. And I'm delighted to be in conversation with renowned choreographer Lee Anderson this afternoon. This seminar is part of a series of seminars within the Centre for Dance Research. And my doctoral research is centred on the sort of costume archive of Lee's sort of famous companies, the Chumleys and the Fanshaws. But today we're talking about something quite different. We're talking about her current research, pop portraits. Lee undertook a residency here with the Roehampton students, a 2-day residency in October, which formed part of, I suppose, your process for a wider research project. And we thought we'd begin by showing a short clip which details a little bit the work that Lee undertook in that residency.
That's right. Hold on. Yeah, that's okay.
My residency here at Roehampton is to examine some popular portraits or portraits of popular artists who are known because of their movement style. So dancers and non-dancers, and we're going to be exploring movement and seeing if it's actually possible to create an essence of that person's movement. The thing came to me when I was looking at screen printed portraits by Andy Warhol of popular artists in the 60s and 70s. It's kind of, can you boil down a portrait to the main key stylistic aspects? And I wondered how this might translate into movement. Would it reveal something about the nature of their movement and why we find it so attractive? The tasks that the students are doing at the moment, or have been doing this morning, have been various. They have been looking at Michael Jackson promo videos and looking at what is the move, what are the moves that you most closely associate with Michael Jackson. So they've been looking at 10 moves that are Michael Jackson's quintessential moves that he prefers to use live. Both groups, they'll be looking at Janis Joplin's movement in her very famous performance in Monterey, which is very fragmented because of choices of the camera. We just see her head or an arm and quite a lot of her feet. So I'm interested to see how the reconstructors, the historical reconstructors, are going to make of that. But I love the idea of exploring what it might be to present a gallery of dance portraits, of movement portraits. That it might be a film of each that's projected, or whether to have a live version of it. So this is going to help me decide. But I'd love to explore what exactly a portrait gallery in movement might be.
So today we're kind of just going to have a very informal sort of conversation or sharing, and I'll open it to questions as well a little bit later on, so if there's anything specific you want to ask. I mean, I think you summarise it really clearly in the video, actually.
Good.
But I wondered if you wanted to talk any more widely, because I know this residency was part of a kind of a wider project, and you've also worked with students in other institutions.
Yes.
If you wanted to talk more widely about the pop portraits.
Yes, I did actually work on a pop portrait in 1996, where I worked with the Fanshaws to document and list every single Elvis Presley move that we have on film. And because he's got such a limited kind of movement, let's say language, vocabulary, it was very much about whether he was lifting a heel, which bit of his pelvis was shifting, was it a toe and a heel? We just made a list of every foot move. And then we found every single arm and upper body movement that wasn't playing a guitar. We decided to eliminate playing guitar and microphone activity. And then we placed arbitrarily the list of arm movements with the list of feet movements and made a piece of work called Elvis Legs that proved to be kind of, it lasted longer than the larger work that it came from. And earlier this year, when I was presenting Hand in Glove at the V&A, Elvis Legs was one of the pieces that I presented, and it was performed about 6 times a day, every day. And it was really extraordinary, the response of the audience. I was sitting throughout it was quite a long show every day, 3 hours. And so I was sitting watching how the audience responded to different things that were on. It was kind of like a retrospective of little bits of choreography over the years. But there was something about Elvis Legs that people kind of got very excited about. And I wondered then if it was something about whatever made those people scream when Elvis was doing that movement. Is there something in it that makes people excited? So I began to be interested in what it was about movement that got people, not dance audiences, but just audiences really excited. And I was sitting there all day long for hours, and I'd think, here they go again, and they're getting really excited and squealing. And I thought, I wonder if I could, and I started to think about how this might be developed, and that's how I came to be working on this. So it's still an ongoing project. I've learnt a lot, the difference between Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson moves, Muhammad Ali, I've been looking at, who else? Martha Graham, because she was in a Andy Warhol portrait, but that's a different thing. I was just doing that to be perverse, I think. And Marilyn Monroe, and after my time with students here, I've been looking at Janis Joplin quite a bit. And I realised that the most successful material for using in this way as a portrait, whatever that might mean, might not necessarily be the people that you first think of as having a very strong style. For example, Michael Jackson, everyone knows what he moves like. He was so central and major, his impact on not only MTV promo videos on that, but just generally, people started dancing differently in popular sort of street dance stuff. And it's very hard, I find, to get the essence of Michael Jackson, because all you end up doing is a Michael Jackson spoof.
To interject, I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit more about that, because we're really familiar with this idea of borrowing from something or doing something in the spirit or style of another work, but this very particular idea of copying, where you're really, really, really trying to distill down this kind of serum of, the essence of somebody's movement. And I think it's interesting, like with Elvis Legs, that you deliberately didn't use the ones with the guitar or the microphone, or maybe iconic ones. And with Michael Jackson, you were asking the students to look at work that wasn't the sort of official MTV, not the pop videos, but him in concert.
Yeah.
But perhaps he's an artist who was so choreographed anyway that he didn't really step outside of the kind of choreographed lexicon, whereas Janis Joplin is sort of the opposite, where it's this really involuntary almost movement. And I wondered, could you talk a little bit more about what that idea of copying is when you're asking dancers to try and replicate the movements?
I think when I'm asking dancers to replicate the movements, what I'm really interested in is two very difficult things. One is to be exact in which part of the body is being used and how, and copy it literally. I'm not interested in your interpretation or changing it in any way. Is a literal, it's like a sample of a piece of music where you're sampling James Brown. You're not changing a few notes because you didn't like it or you feel that it doesn't express what, it is a sample of that. And because physically no one is that person, and your arm doesn't bend in the same way, your fingers don't, your face doesn't have the same muscles, you can never, ever do that. So just allowing your physicality to be the strainer that allows some different kind of movement, that's what I'm looking for. And I'm also looking for that thing which I feel we lose a lot in dance, is that pretending to be someone or fantasy in your bedroom. The pop fan thing where you might pretend to be, or you let go, you dance to music and you're in a different place. You're not self-conscious, you're not doing your, I don't know, BA or MA. You're reconnecting with this thing that humans do where you live someone else and you believe that you're them. And when you see someone doing that kind of impersonation, you can really see that although they look nothing like them, that there's something, they're sort of touched with the ghost of that person. And I love it. I love it when people are lost in it. And if you can do the exact movements on the exact counts and be lost, I'm in heaven. I mean, what more could you want? It's just perfect. So that's what I'm looking for. But the choice of the movement is very different. And I think that Elvis is not choreographed mostly, except of course in Jailhouse Rock, but even and things like that. But he did use his moves, whereas Michael Jackson was completely choreographed and worked with his choreographer a lot. So I found that after my work here with the Roehampton students, I went to Chichester and subjected them to more torture for longer. And I realised that the only way to do it with Michael Jackson, for example, is to take an iconic Jackson move, which I call maybe the silhouette sort of shapes, where he's got his knee pointing to one side and he'll like pop his collar and open the jacket and look really fast from one way to the other. Take that and to just and deal with it in a rhythmic structure that accentuates that the key moments and never let it move on to another piece of choreography. So never get, or if you're doing the spins and it's just got to be spin, 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 in a really complicated rhythmic way, to draw attention to that move and not to allow the audience to just sit into enjoying that kind of style of choreography. So each portrait seems to me to beg a different approach depending on the movement of the person, the context that we saw this icon of movement, and what actually works. For example, Janis Joplin would never think of her as a movement icon, but her movement is really interesting, and I found that I think we started work here with Janis Joplin to try, I thought lip syncing might help as a way to find that pretending to be someone, or fantasizing that you're somebody, and imagining what it'd be like to produce that kind of sound. So we started lip syncing here, and then I went to Chichester and developed that into, I called it a verbatim lip syncing chorus line of Janis Joplin's coming across the stage, shifting on each one and lip syncing and dressed as Janis, and copying the moves. When you don't see the entire body, as dance historians, we have to decide as a group what we think she would have been doing at that time, and we come to a consensus. But yeah, so each thing is really different.
I wonder, is it worth showing?
Yeah.
Janice, to get an idea of what the students were confronted with as well.
Yeah, you might notice her stamping is very much to do with the kind of shoes she's wearing, which is very interesting. Oh, it's a long intro. We don't do the bands, we only do Janis. Oh, it's a bit unfocused, isn't it? Just looking out at the rain. Sitting down by my window, just looking out at the rain. Some came along, honey, grabbed a hold of it, and it fell like a ball and shade. That's enough. I think that's enough of that. Get the hang of that. Mama Cass was enjoying it.
I mean, you were talking about how partial the footage is,
Yeah.
and we can't see whole parts of her body or whatever. I wondered, you can see how each portrait would really demand a different kind of approach or methodology. Are there any difficulties or experiences you've had coming out of, trying to approach these different ones in an overarching way?
I think it's just taken me a while to understand just how different each one is and to be open to that. And the most interesting ones I think I found by accident, like trying to deal with something like how do you embody, how do you persuade performers to go to that place of the fantasy icon thing to actually physicalize it. And so doing this was just a way to try and deal with breath and presence and something a little bit more subtle than, say, Michael Jackson. And actually this ended up being more interesting. And also another one I did was Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot, Running Wild, which plays, I don't know if you know it, which plays the ukulele in the train. I asked a group of students to look at that whilst I was doing something else. And I really didn't think that that would amount to anything. And actually, one of the dancers had an extraordinary ability. Her face was nothing like Marilyn Monroe, but just the sensitivity in her face, the softness and the sort of the feel of her lips and open eyes and the way that she winked in it was so Marilyn Monroe, and I can see that. That is really intriguing, is when people who look nothing like anyone that you're looking at can actually embody it. So, and then I found my way into looking at that. So I think that more I'm discovering by accident something that someone's offering up as a way in a different route. So so now I'm happily trying to make accidents, trying to provoke accidents to see what people respond well to. But I think I've got Michael Jackson down now. Muhammad Ali has been the most difficult one because I wanted to do just reproduce 2 minutes of his fight with Sonny Liston from 1964, where he doesn't really behave like a proper boxer. He's taunting him and he's sort of skipping around, just getting out of the way, and he's got his arms down and he doesn't lift them. And that is a really interesting piece of movement. When I reconstructed that, showed it to a boxing aficionado who recognized it, which is amazing that a dancer could quote it so accurately that a fan would say that I know exactly what round that is and what match it is. So there's all sorts of new things that are coming out of it. I'm not really sure how to deal with it all yet, but I'm hoping to the idea of a portrait gallery. It might be that there's the same portrait all around in a gallery space, but I'd like to get it back to a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, if you count time, I guess, way of projecting films of this movement back onto a surface. And I'm not sure how literally to reference Warhol, but certainly that was my inspiration. I mean, Warhol didn't do Janis, but Janis, I could argue that he would have done her if she had lived a bit longer, or You know, she might have been on his list. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I could discover Warhols that no one else has seen that were on his list, which is also quite interesting. So I'm not quite sure where it's to go yet.
I was intrigued by the role of a portrait and what a portrait actually is, and also when we think now of what portraiture is in sort of contemporary society. So, you know, we're so used to now being sort of awash with selfies, but also retouched images. So much of you know, photographs and even film is not the original, or is a particularly crafted version. And you're sort of going back to this. We were talking about it earlier, like a more sort of artisan way of creating a portrait, whilst also referencing an artist in Warhol as somebody who really kind of tapped in to popular culture and therefore then influenced it hugely going forward from him. You know, we're sort of still in that legacy, I suppose. But where you see the role of the portrait and what your conception of a portrait is in this particular research.
The reason why I was particularly inspired by the Warhol silkscreen is that it's so graphic and so kind of undetailed. You know, there's just big areas of the face they've got no lines, it's just the lips for Marilyn and the mole and the hairdo, and it's even cropped here. You don't even need to see her curvy body or any other sort of, you know, I don't know, cliche about her. It's just the bare minimum to show what we're referring to, and that appealed to me hugely. And what is it that makes people get all excited? How do you provoke that? Is it something in the movement that you can then find and show again and people get excited? Or is it the fact that it's, I'm calling it the Pop Portrait Project because I like the idea of them being like 4-minute pieces or 3 minutes, like an old-fashioned pop song, something that was in that time, was short, sharp, clear structure. It's got an introduction, it's got chorus, and then it finishes, and that's it. And you don't have to, it's not durational unless you count all the different ones. So it's all this kind of bursts of graphic overload that are really exciting, and I get really overexcited doing it. Actually, it's a very different way of working. Yeah, just trying to be at the pitch of excitement all the time.
And thinking as well about where portraits sit. So if you're envisaging this as being, you know, potentially as a portrait in a portrait gallery kind of, I suppose Hand in Glove was an experience where you were looking at how you could transpose, very much born out of a theatrical and theatre-based production, and how that can then live in a gallery. And I don't know how that might have informed then how you're thinking about this.
Hugely, yeah. Yeah, it was really, well, I did Hand in Glove in the V&A earlier this year, and the people that came to see it were a real mixture of people who knew about it and wanted to see it, had an interest either in the dance, the archive or costume, and people who just happened to pass by. And it was something like Elvis Legs that made the passers-by and the people who knew about it very excited. And there were huge paintings on the walls of the gallery that I was looking at, these sort of huge Rubens, and it was really great just to fantasize about how that would sit in a museum very differently, and how it would be interesting. Sometimes you can sell, I find that I can sell dance. If I'm trying to get some gigs, you can not tell people that it's dance and outside the dance world, and they'll fall for it. You can sell it as music, a live music thing, or as a comedy thing, or that way I've padded out huge tours to get extra gigs by going to festivals and all sorts of other places, or cabaret, because no one has told them it's dance. As soon as you tell them it's that difficult D word, you know, it's going to be like, I've done I went to see Wayne McGregor this year. I can't possibly go again to see anything. I've had my share. So I love the idea of sneaking in dance as something else, because everyone likes dance. There's just they don't really get to see something, because well, would you? You don't know that, do you? Because you're all dance people. But most people think it's really difficult. So yes, and I do like the idea of sort of, you know, getting in there and showing people stuff before they can run for the door. Yeah.
I kind of want to switch it around a little. I see one dancer who was involved, not to put you on the spot, I don't know if there's others here who were involved in the workshop, but thinking from the reverse of
Yeah.
asking of the dancers, and I don't want to put you on the spot, you don't have to say anything, but if there was anything you wanted to share about the experience of trying to embody this.
Trying to be Janice.
Yeah, no, just watching that back, there was one movement that we did with the arm, and we
Oh yeah.
had the weight by the wrist, and just looking back at it, it was more like there wasn't any sort of give there. It was more like a Lego arm almost.
That's great.
2 months later,
Yeah.
they're still changing, it's still evolving. And
Yes, and it seemed to be, I was sort of sitting in on the second day, but it is a sort of a forensic process of sort of every single movement or head turn or breath. Was that actually in there, or have we somehow insinuated because that's what we expect there should be? And I suppose that becomes a bigger problem with someone like Michael Jackson, because we all think we know what it looks like. It's probably somewhere in there from practicing in our bedrooms or whatever else. So yeah, that specificity.
That's really interesting, because I've been looking a lot at, I mean, I've looked at this so much more since I worked with you, and still somebody says, but look, you know, look at that, that's, her hair's moving there, which can only mean that she's moving that shoulder, and I didn't see that. There's so much detail, and it's great sharing it with a big group of people. All have got a different take on what it is that they're interested in looking at. Almost too much information. But I'm really pleased you saw something that you didn't see before. Yeah. So did you, was it torture, or did you get to a place where it was fun? I don't know, because it was a bit torturous.
I think with Janice Joplin, I think the lip syncing was that added an element of fun, because it's like as if you're in your bedroom and you know, but getting to that state to begin with, I thought was quite nerve-wracking. And you're in a room and there's cameras as well, and you're sort of like, right, okay. So trying to make that fantasy state look natural without letting your own psychological haze get in the way was difficult, but eventually once we kept doing it over and over, it became fun. So, but yeah.
It's true that self-consciousness of, in order to really do the fantasy thing, you've got to not worry about what your face looks like, and you can't worry how ugly or bizarre you look, and that I find is very hard for dancers to do. Whereas it's just strange, because I'm sure they all did start off in their bedroom pulling funny faces at one point in their lives. Surely. Who didn't? Anyone here that has never done that?
But yeah, facially, I suppose, especially with Janice Joplin, it's a much more, there isn't safety of any choreography or any sort of, other things to latch on, so you have to really let go. And it did seem like the lip syncing was a bit of a release, where people then started to embody a bit more comfortably, pushing it a little bit further, because, there was a sort of a fun moment of trying to take that on.
And the costume, what people are wearing, is also really important. Every little detail, like once we realised that a shoe would fly off, she lifts her foot like that, and the shoe, she remembers that she's got these, you know, shoes that have got no fastening on the back, so she cannot put her knee up. So she's got this weird stamping with her knees together, which I never understood why she did that when I'd seen this before. But we can see that now, and the way that her hair impacts on sort of movements that she does. So exactly what people are wearing, how close to the mic, what kind of mic. It had a disc on the base, so it rolled when she leant on it or moved it. So all of this kind of building up a picture of where the audience are, how wide, how far they go back, how she sings, the kind of voice she's got, how she uses her voice means that you need to breathe and give the impression that you're belting out this kind of sound, and that it really is coming from your lungs. It's quite a tricky thing to observe, but I enjoy watching it. Anyway.
I wonder, is that a good moment to open it out a little to see if there's any other questions or
suggestions
thoughts.
of things that I should be doing?
Yes.
Just specifically about Janis Joplin, because it's really fascinating. Were the dancers asked to actually vocalise at all, or just lip syncing?
Lip syncing. Because lip syncing, I knew that everyone will have seen RuPaul Drag Show, and I know that everyone will know about lip syncing as a thing to do. That's a kind of just short of actually vocalising. Because as soon as you hear your own voice and it's not Janis Joplin, it spoils the illusion. Doesn't it always? It does me. So we stopped short there, but it was a kind of an exercise. I think that if we'd worked longer on it, just what is it like to hold a note that long? What does it do to you? Where do you take the breath in, and then to look at her and maybe mark where she's breathing, in order to get that. That's kind of where I would like to go next.
Because in contrast to somebody like Michael Jackson, you can feel that the movement is very much centred in the way that the voice is behaving. Whereas with Michael Jackson, it's like, remember him, it's layered on top of whatever he's doing vocally. So there's kind of a choreography thing going on, and there's a vocal thing going on, and there's something. Whereas it doesn't seem to be the case.
No, it's really different. I guess which is why I didn't think of her first, and why it's more rewarding, because it's such a surprise that this works in this way. So I'm having to modify that it's not necessarily portraits of people who are famous for their movements, but movement portraits of famous people of for whatever reason they're famous. Almost more interesting.
Thank you so much for this lovely presentation. What I found very exciting about your project is that in looking at portraits, or departing from portraits and focusing on movement, I think the research is really, once again, showing how identities, because portraits is about identities, right? Whether it's a singular identity or group identity. So it's really showing how identities are constructed or depart from movement.
Yes.
Right, and what I think what's so nice in relationship to Warhol is because Warhol is doing the opposite, because he's giving you the superficial essence, the face flat out, and you showing everything that is not in the portrait. So I think it deepens, from there, you're looking on the other side of the moon in a little bit. So from this idea, what was curious to me that I wanted to ask you is, in this cataloging and in reviewing with your students and with whoever you're working with, whether you then creating a discretion between this construction of the portraits or identity, where is it coming from? Body alignment, for instance, or what is it gestural? Where it steps, because I found that a lot of the images that you showed here has to do with gesture, and gesture is a particular kind of movement. If an umbrella, because I heard you speaking of movement, but I think gesture does particular things that I found was interesting, or the relationship between weight and the use of legs in Elvis, which are not necessarily a gesture, but it has like symbolic ideas. So I was wondering, in your process, as you're discriminating movement, whether you're putting them, arranging them in categories based on whether this is more gesture, whether this is more step, whether this is more has to do with how you carry the body. Because I find it that we can find a lot of commonalities between Janis Joplin and Michael Jackson, because it's the way in which they carry their body, and then the choices they make produces the identity in the end.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'm struck by how my preconceived ideas of gesture and categories are kind of blurring as I work. And the two that you mentioned, Janis Joplin and Michael Jackson, they're both singers, even though in completely different contexts. I mean, Janis Joplin, as far as I know, didn't make a film promo primarily for showing on TV. It's a different, her gesture has a different meaning and a different context. But then you've got someone like Muhammad Ali, whose actions are very clearly to do with a particular kind of activity. It's not that kind of performance, but because of other things, for example, the need to present a narrow section of the body to his opponent, has an incredible sort of self-awareness that almost looks like it's performed to the camera on that side because of the way the camera's placed itself. And his additional gestures, he does this thing in this match where he, every now and again, he just puts his glove on his forehead as a kind of, it's almost like a ritualistic thing, and then he does this now and again. You don't know why he does it. I've spoken to people who know about boxing, and they all talk about it, but no one really knows why he's doing it. So there's a mixture of all sorts of categories of gesture and action. So at the moment, I can't quite categorize everyone because it's too varied.
I'm not interested in categorizing. What I'm interested is whether you're noticing. This is exactly why you're saying, because then there are the movements that have a function. They come because there is a clear function. I must punch you in the head. And then there are other movements where there is, the form itself arrives first. So there are certain things that he does with the feet that has to do with playing with polyrhythms.
Sure.
That it's not something that, you don't need this in order to box, but he has created a way of carrying his body and arrange it that gave him superiority, it made him, so he's playing with form as well, not just the function.
Yeah, sure. And also, I noticed with Janice, the more I've worked on Janice, is that not only is it her performance style and things, but some of the gestures are coming from, it seems, a desire to hit a note, or how she's thinking of it. And you can really imagine, I mean, I can't prove it, but I imagine just from the way that she's connecting something that it's helping her in a phrase or where the note's going, because the music is blues and it's really clearly, and she's stamping on the counts, but the jazz phrasing of her singing moves around that, and so the gesture it sits on the count and off the count, and maybe the function of the gesture is maybe it's as important as a punch from Muhammad Ali, is her kind of the move. If you could, and to make that visible in the portrait, I think is really interesting. So
it's quite interesting.
It's just there's endless movement information in a film.
I see Tamara, and then I'll come down. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was super interesting. Over there with me, I was really interested in this idea of the boundary of the portrait, your act of dissecting to very small bits. And something that you said about sample was really interesting, but also how the impersonation came into it. And to me, when I think of the impersonation, it's likely also really exposing the person impersonating. So is this act of narrowing down the scenes, or maybe kind of stripping to particular, almost like a GIF, like animated. So that sample, is that also helping you keep the portrait from becoming a self-portrait? I don't know whether you're on that or...
No, I agree that, well, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but by seeing somebody totally embody another person, it's a portrait, it's a revelation of the performer that's showing it, and it's extraordinary. And I'm trying not to dwell on that when I talk about it, because of the as soon as you get too self-conscious, it's really difficult to sort of tune into that. But it's kind of a portrait of one thing, but it opens up all sorts of other things, yes. But don't tell anyone.
I'm really interested in the Michael Jackson, being someone that grew up in my bedroom with Michael Jackson. What performances in particular you used? Because I find, having done a couple of my BA bits of research on Michael Jackson, sorry, I'm losing my voice because of 2 weeks of teaching. His vocal and movement would be slightly different depending on what note he would hit, in similar way to Janice. So he would hit or like cut a note short and almost growl it, whereas in a music video it would be a lot more pure. And I was just wondering if you studied his vocals as close as you studied Janice's and his breathing patterns, because he's obviously dancing singing,
Mm.
and that's a very physically demanding thing as opposed to Janice, who's she's dancing through these movements that she's accenting through as more soulful or more a function to hit a vocal chord. And Michael would do the same thing, but obviously through that sort of dance vocabulary. Just wondering how closely you followed those two things.
All the things that you've talked about are things that I've kind of, I did it much more recently than you, that his moves also changed through the years.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the 80s as the sort of the key Michael Jackson era, and about 5 of the promos that I looked at originally, but then found that I really wanted to know what his personal, if he's improvising at a show, live show, or something like Billie Jean, where it seems like that's based on his moves rather than another choreographer coming in and choreographing it. I don't know, a big example would be Thriller, or one of the huge numbers, Beat It or whatever. Looking at those and then trying to trace them back, because actually there's a lot of the moves that you can see the beginnings of in the Jackson 5 even. Softer, and so the style becomes imbued with cultural norms of street dance and other things that affect him. But he's always got a really strong sense of silhouette, and he favours. He's got a right leg that turns out more than the left. He always turns to the one way only. He's got mannerisms that you can trace right back. So the more you look at it, the more you realise that you need to maybe, in order to get away from dancing, doing a Michael Jackson style dance. You need to sort of tease out all of those things, and looking to how he phrases stuff. I tried to then move away from the promos to his live work to see how he favours what he favoured doing and what his instinct was when confronted, because he uses the moves almost like a drum break in the song and then he can come in on the note really strongly. So I guess all these things were what he was thinking about when he worked. So but ongoing,
Okay, cool.
But yeah, so it's different. But you end up having to look at all of that stuff, just as you suggest. Yeah.
There's one at the front, and then or if it's related, which.
I just wanted to follow on. I've got another point, but I just wanted to follow on from what you said, that Cheryl Dodds in the States, who does a lot of work on popular culture, she's just done some fantastic work on analysing the facial gestures of Michael Jackson.
Really?
And how they changed in the kind of social historical. There's all the smiley stuff with the Jackson 5, and then the grimace came, and she tracked it through. Really, really interesting.
And how the date that he stopped looking into the camera.
Yeah.
There was a date, and he never looked in the camera again. He looks down. Whereas, he always looked out.
And if I may I just raise one other comment really about your the particularity of the breath, because I know we look at that as dancers, but just from what you've been talking about and what we saw, the breath is clearly so important, not just for the singers, and there's obviously the breath in the Muhammad Ali moves as well. And it reminded me, Maureen Lipman the other day was on the box, and she did a takeoff of Theresa May, and she said, oh, well, if you look at her, she's completely sucked out of breath, and she stood up and did this move, sucking the breath out of her body, and she had the essence of Theresa May, and it struck me that how essential.
It's called uptight, isn't it?
She got it to, she got the essence of it, and it was to do with breath.
So do you think if you completely copy a person, you can end up thinking how they think? Just embodying it. Yeah, no, it's a lot of stuff.
A lot of what you're saying is it's fascinating from a learning point of view in terms of dance scholarship as well as an artistic work. And I'm wondering whether you had any thought of spreading that learning to, for example, actors or drag artists or singers.
My problem is selfishness, and dancers are so fantastic. Dancers can just give them more and more things to consider, and they're so physically curious. And when I work with actors and other people, even there's some really great ones, really great actors, but generally they're not really quite as observant in the nuance of movement. So I'm just wanting to find out more So maybe later, but not now. Yeah. Yeah, they'll just have to we'll just have to get on the back of the jacket. On his jacket, yeah. Yeah, because I don't really feel like I'm sort of in the middle of it at the moment. Yeah.
We have time for one more, yeah.
For me, I keep on coming back to the idea of internal and external, or the idea of embodying movement or executing movement. So, for example, as a teacher, my initial responsibility is to execute, but then immediately you try and progress their learning by asking them to internalize movement. And that's kind of what I think about when you're talking about the essence of something. These gestures or whatever functions, they become external, but they all start internal. I don't know whether that's something that you speak about or...
I do, and I think of it the other way around. I think if it starts external, it will become internal.
Okay.
If you concentrate on the exact counts and get that really correct in your body, and then it will come inwards. And it's the wrong way. No, I know it's wrong, but I found it. No, but wrong. It goes against the grain. But I find that really does. It works.
Yeah.
Once you've got your counts all right and you're really confident in it, and then you add the internal bit, it's breathtaking. If you've got the internal, you can't. It's really hard to make that break from that feeling to the accuracy of the small thing. And it's a very good reason for that, because you're in a different place. I think you have to get the big sketch of it in first, like the dots, and then join it. And then when you've completely embraced it, then the minutiae of where you can go to is infinite and beguiling to the viewer.
Sense. Yeah, that's because that's technically how practically one teaches, that you give that kind of obvious, this is where you go. But then that's always going to be only to a certain level, unless the next, the next level is discussed. Yeah, that's interesting.
And how you look at a dancer or a student dancing, and when somebody is internal and external, it's joyous. And that's the big difficult thing, is that when people start off dancing, they're in their bedrooms and it's completely internalized. Then you get all the chops. Can you reconnect with that little bedroom dancer and make a whole portrait of yourself, I think.
I think that's a really nice note to end on. I'm afraid we have no more time, but Lee, thank you so much.
Thank you.